A farmer braved a raging storm to help a stranded man. By morning, an F-16 was circling his land. What they were after would change everything. A fierce storm raged over the open fields, wind howling like a wild beast. The rain slammed against the old farmhouse as Daniel Harper, a seasoned farmer and crop duster pilot, secured the last of his equipment in the barn. The sky crackled with lightning, illuminating the vast farmland for mere seconds, before plunging it into darkness again. Just as Daniel turned to head inside, a pair of headlights flickered in the distance. His brow furrowed. Who would be out in this weather? The lights swayed, then disappeared behind the hills. Something was wrong. Without a second thought, Daniel grabbed his raincoat, hopped onto his old pickup, and sped down the dirt road. The storm made visibility near impossible, but after a few minutes he spotted it. A black sedan, its front half buried in the muddy ditch. A man inside banged weakly against the window. Daniel yanked the door open, and the stranger collapsed into his arms, shivering and barely conscious. "You're all right, buddy. I gotcha." Daniel pulled him up, noticing the soaked suit clinging to his frail frame. The man mumbled something, his eyes fluttering. His lips were pale. He was on the brink of hypothermia. Without wasting time, Daniel threw a blanket over him and loaded him into the truck. The ride back was rough, the tires struggling against the flooded road, but eventually they reached the farmhouse. Daniel carried the man inside, placing him by the fireplace, and rushed to grab dry clothes. As the flames flickered, the stranger coughed violently, slowly regaining strength. His eyes, sharp and alert despite his exhaustion, darted around the room. "Where am I?" he whispered hoarsely. "My farm," Daniel said, handing him a warm cup of coffee. "I found you out on the road. Looked like you needed help." The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." Daniel waved off the gratitude. "Storm's gonna last through the night. You can stay here till morning." The stranger hesitated, glancing at his wristwatch, then out the window. "I appreciate it, but I need to leave as soon as the storm clears." Daniel found his urgency odd, but didn't press further. As dawn broke, the storm finally subsided, revealing a sky painted in soft hues of gold and blue. The stranger, now dry and steady, adjusted his tie and turned to Daniel. "I owe you for last night." He reached into his pocket, but Daniel shook his head. "Just glad you're all right." The man gave a small, knowing smile. Then without another word, he stepped outside, walking towards the open field. Daniel watched in confusion. "Hey, the road's that way." Before he could finish, the low hum of engines filled the air. Daniel turned, his breath catching in his throat. An F-16 fighter jet soared overhead. Within seconds, the sound of approaching vehicles rumbled in the distance. Black SUVs, moving fast. Daniel's stomach twisted. Who had he just saved? The roar of the F-16 jet sent a chill down Daniel's spine. He stood frozen on his porch as the jet circled above, its sharp silhouette slicing through the morning sky. Then the unmistakable rumble of heavy tires tore through the farmland's quiet. A convoy of black SUVs kicked up dust as they sped down the dirt road, heading straight for his property. Daniel's grip tightened on the porch railing. Something was wrong. No one drove out here unless they had a reason. And these vehicles weren't the kind that came for casual visits. The man he had rescued, still standing in the open field, didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly adjusted his cufflinks, his expression unreadable. Within seconds, the SUVs skidded to a halt, surrounding the property in a near-perfect formation. Doors flew open, and out stepped men in suits, their posture rigid, their movements precise. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He knew a government presence when he saw one. These men weren't regular folks. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward, removing his sunglasses. "Sir, we need you to come with us." The stranger didn't move. He simply glanced back at Daniel, as if measuring his reaction, before finally speaking. "I told you I had to leave early." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You didn't mention this." The man offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "Some things are better left unsaid." The lead agent stepped closer. "Sir, with all due respect, we don't have time for this." Daniel finally found his voice. "Who is he?" he demanded, eyes darting between the agents and the stranger. What's going on? Silence. None of the agents responded, but the stranger sighed, running a hand through his still damp hair. He deserves to know, he muttered. The agent hesitated, then nodded. The stranger turned to Daniel, his expression serious now. My name is not important, but what I can tell you is that last night, you unknowingly saved someone the world believes disappeared years ago. Daniel's stomach dropped. What? The man took a step closer. I was presumed dead, and for good reason, but something's changed. His gaze darkened. I need to return. Daniel struggled to process the words. This man, who he had carried into his home, fed, kept warm, wasn't just a lost traveler. He was something much, much bigger. Before Daniel could respond, the lead agent turned to the team. Secure the perimeter. The other agents immediately sprang into action. One of them spoke into a radio. Echo 1, this is Blackbird. Target recovered, preparing for extraction. Daniel inhaled sharply. Target? The F-16 jet, which had been circling, suddenly dropped lower, its engines screaming. The sound sent the horses in the barn into a frenzy. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy that made Daniel's skin prickle. The stranger turned to him one last time. I owe you a debt, one that won't be forgotten. Daniel took a step forward. Wait. But before he could get another word out, the agents ushered the man toward one of the SUVs. Within seconds, the doors slammed shut. The engines roared and the convoy peeled away, vanishing down the road as fast as it had come. Daniel stood there, dust settling around him, his mind still trying to catch up. Had he just saved a ghost? And more importantly, who had he really let into his home? The silence left in the convoy's wake was deafening. Daniel stood there, his heart still hammering against his ribs, the morning sun doing little to chase away the chill that had settled in his bones. He had spent his life in this small town, tending to his crops, fixing old machinery, living a quiet, predictable existence. But in the span of a single night, everything had changed. The man he had sheltered wasn't just some lost traveler. He was someone the government was desperately trying to keep hidden. Someone important, someone dangerous. Daniel's mind raced. Was he in trouble for helping him? Would the government come back? Would they make him disappear too? Before he could process his next move, a low rumble filled the air again. He snapped his head up just in time to see the F-16 jet that had been circling make one final pass over his farm. But this time, something was different. The jet tipped its wings slightly, almost as if it were saluting him. Then in a blink, it accelerated and shot off into the sky, disappearing into the horizon. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers gripping the wooden railing of his porch. His hands were still shaking. For the next few days, life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after something like that. He woke up at dawn, tended to the fields, fixed the fences that had taken a beating during the storm. But no matter how much he tried to focus on his work, his mind kept drifting back to that night. He found himself replaying every detail, the way the man had spoken, the weight behind his words, the absolute control he had over his emotions. He was trained. Not just any man could face down government agents with that level of calm. Who had he really been? And why did Daniel have the feeling that this wasn't over? His answer came a week later. It was late afternoon when Daniel heard it, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching against gravel. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped onto the porch, his stomach tightening. A single black SUV had pulled up at the edge of his driveway. Daniel's pulse quickened. Not again. The driver's door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. But it wasn't one of the agents from before. This man was older, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, his movements deliberate and controlled. He shut the door gently and walked toward Daniel, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the dirt road. He stopped a few feet away, studying Daniel with an expression that was unreadable. Finally, he spoke. You helped him. Daniel swallowed. He didn't need to ask who him was. I did what anyone would have done, he replied carefully. The man's lips twitched into something that almost resembled a smile. No, he said, shaking his head. You did what very few would have done. Daniel stayed silent, his muscles tense. The man reached into his coat pocket, and for a brief moment, Daniel's breath hitched. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a small, unmarked envelope and held it out. Daniel hesitated before taking it. The envelope was heavier than he expected. "What's this?" he asked. The man's expression softened just a fraction. "A token of gratitude," he said, "for a debt that can never truly be repaid." Daniel frowned, his fingers tightening around the envelope. Before he could ask anything else, the man gave him a small nod and turned back toward the SUV. He climbed inside, shut the door, and within seconds the vehicle was gone, just like before, leaving only dust in its wake. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the envelope in his hands. His heart pounded as he carefully peeled it open. Inside was a neatly folded note. "You saved a man who once saved millions." Beneath the note was something else, something that made Daniel's breath hitch. A medal. Not just any medal, a military honor, one that only the highest, most decorated operatives ever received. Daniel's hands trembled as he held it, the weight of it far heavier than it should have been. Whatever, or whoever, that man had been, Daniel had just played a role in something far bigger than himself, and he had a feeling this was only the beginning. Morale. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can change lives in ways we never expect. The people we help today might turn out to be far more important than we ever imagined. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Legacy Tales so you don't miss the next one, and let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Daniel's place?